Okay, we will begin the meeting. We always start with a song, a prayer, and we pledge allegiance. So if everybody would stand, we'll start the meeting. Thank you, John Palmquist, for doing the prayer today. First of all, I want to welcome the public figures for sure. Doug Peterson, our Attorney General, is with us today. He'll be our program. He'll be introduced in a little bit. Thank you, law enforcement, Gus and Doug. Thanks for being here. I will have Jim. You want to introduce the Rotarians? Okay. Got another thank you from the Key Club members from our thank you letters and the chamber bucks. We have been doing the parade for Homestead Days for the past several years. We're fortunate to get to do it again. So. And even all you guests that would like to know what it takes to line up the Homestead Days Parade every year, you can sign up too. So I'll pass around the sign-up sheet. Okay, is there anything else that needs to be brought up to the membership? If not, Roger, would you introduce our guest for today?
It gives me a great deal of honor and privilege to introduce the Attorney General of the great state of Nebraska, Doug Peterson. You'll notice he talks, and looking at his bio here, he's a very humble man, and we're very fortunate to have him as the dedicated public servant he is. Mr. AG, I'll just warn you that this is on YouTube. I failed to remember that last week. I'm sure the Chief Justice is after my hiding now, but that's just the way life goes. Doug was born in Columbus, Nebraska. He grew up primarily in Lincoln, graduated from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, then went on to Pepperdine University School of Law, where he graduated. He did practice out in North Platte, working in the Lincoln County Attorney's Office for a couple of years, and then went on to the Attorney General's office, where he served as an assistant in that office, doing employment law matters as well as tort litigation. In 1990, he went back into private practice, where he had representation of both private clients and business. And he then became our, well, it says 32nd after his first 4 years. You're all laughing, you know it's true. After his first 4 years of service, he ran for election and was unopposed in 2018. I would just add a note that he does work very well with both law enforcement agencies and with the local county attorneys and prosecutors, providing us with extremely good help, particularly in tough cases, and I truly appreciate that. So please give me a warm Beatrice welcome for the Attorney General of the state of Nebraska, Doug Peterson.
Well, thank you. I always get a little intimidated with Kiwanis meetings because I remember my first job out in North Platte, the county board member said, "Hey, do you want to come to a Kiwanis meeting for lunch?" And I said, "Sure." Joe Hughley, I don't know if any of you know Joe. So Joe invited me, and all of a sudden they put a song book in front of me. And I told him, "Hey, Petersons, we don't sing," and you'll understand why pretty quickly after I taught it. So it was funny. Joe invited me once. I was never invited back to Thanks for the opportunity to come down and talk. I was down here quite a bit about 8-9 months ago when we tried a case down here with a person involving Ty Thomas, the young woman down at Blue State College, and just appreciated the hospitality. The matter was moved from Richardson County up to here. I really appreciated law enforcement's kindness to us. Roger always making his office available to our team of prosecutors, and most of all, very appreciative of the jury down here that considered the evidence and came forth with a second-degree murder conviction. I was just telling Roger, I think everyone who had an opportunity to look at Mr. Kittle's history recognized that this guy was about to get out of prison for a rape in Fremont at Midland College, and he had all the attributes of someone who would reoffend. And so that was one of the greatest concerns I had, is this guy was going to be getting out in a matter of months, and fortunately we were able to get that conviction, and I don't think he's looking at the opportunity of parole for another 35 years. So anyway, let me just give you a quick overview of the office and what we do, and then I'll share just a little bit of one of the things that's really consuming a lot of my time, and then open it up to question and answer, which I always enjoy. Anything is open for discussion. I mean, you can ask any question, it's just how do I answer is the thing. We have about 65 lawyers and another 40-some staff, which include investigators and paralegals and others in the office. We have a budget of about $11 million a year, and most $6 million of that's through the general budget. But our primary area is criminal prosecution and criminal appeals. So any criminal conviction that occurs across the state, if the defendant appeals that case, we have a team of lawyers who will brief the case, review the record, and argue the case to the Supreme Court. As far as criminal prosecutions, we have jurisdiction in all 93 counties. Typically what happens is certain counties may have a part-time county attorney, or they may have a certain case or the nature of the case that the county attorney will say, need you come in and help us on this case, or would you prosecute the case? And those are typically murder cases, child sexual assault cases. We have a couple prosecutors who almost focus exclusively on child sexual assault. So if you have a fairly rural county and they have not investigated a child sexual assault case in several years, we'll send out, if they request, we'll send out a team of investigators and then also prosecutors if they request that. So it's one of the most important things we do in that office. The other thing we do is civil litigation, where we represent the state anytime the state is sued. One of the things that's also a little bit more common now is states coming together and jointly either filing a lawsuit on an issue. For example, we joined the state of Missouri along with about 14 other states in a lawsuit filed in the Eastern District of the U.S. District Court in Missouri over some executive orders that the Biden administration issued on global warming, not just global warming, but just kind of the Green New Deal propositions, and we challenged a lot of that because we contend that the executive orders were outside the authority of the president to do that, that is something uniquely in the authority of the legislative branch. So those civil litigation cases can run from a civil litigation case in a small county in Nebraska to a civil litigation case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And fortunately, we have a really good team of civil litigation lawyers who do really excellent work. The other area that really is more associated with the criminal side, but that's the Human Trafficking Task Force. That's something that we got, fortunately, in 2015, we got some legislation passed. Up to 2015, Nebraska on a national level in the area of human trafficking, we were rated an F, D-F by National Organization on Human Trafficking. But we were able to get a new law passed, and it's been added to since 2015. We've got a human trafficking task force out of our office, and we've worked closely with law enforcement. We have different regions around the state where you have both law enforcement, you have child protective or service, child advocacy centers, and other support groups in different parts of the state working on human trafficking. And one of the biggest things the first 2 years was just educating the community and everyone with regards to what human trafficking looks like. And the problem we had in Nebraska with regards to human trafficking is we had a really strong federal law. So if there was any human trafficking activity in Omaha, the feds typically, it inevitably involved people going back and forth from the casinos to the Omaha area. So you have the interstate network there, and the federal authorities would investigate and prosecute those cases. The problem was in Nebraska, we didn't have a strong human trafficking law, particularly in the area of penalties. And now with the passage of that law, we have significant penalties, and we have a really, I think, a pretty strong network across the state with strong support by law enforcement and also community service and service providers. One of the biggest challenges in human trafficking is to convince a 16-year-old girl that it's not okay for her to be trafficked around for purposes of sex, and that all he provides for her is a house, food, and a place to stay. That's called slavery. But some of these girls have come from situations that are so bad they will accept those conditions and not even understand how offensive the act really is. So when you pull a young girl out of human trafficking, and it does include boys too, but when you pull them out, there's a real process of trying to convert them over to understand, look, you have value, you have far greater value, and you need to understand that you can't be treated like this. The thing that is so unique about it is the notion is, by all people, is it doesn't happen except in really large cities. Well, it does happen in large cities, and they're pretty sophisticated networks. In fact, they go onto the dark web, and there is a ton of money to be made in trafficking. If you deal in drugs and if you deal in arms, you always have to renew your inventory, right? You have to pay and then mark up. In human trafficking, so profitable, basically you feed and clothe and house. And then you keep using the girls or using the boys. And that's why there's so much money to be made in human trafficking. But it's normally seen as you can have a full spectrum of a large operation that runs between Denver, Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and Omaha. And they can do a fairly sophisticated network on the dark web, which is very difficult for us to find. But you can also have what we're about to try, or started trying today in Frontier County, is a case where one person is trafficking a girl who was basically kicked out of her house at age 15, and this guy had some rental property and started saying you can stay in one of my rentals for free, and then eventually started trafficking. So these are cases that can go from that spectrum to large city spectrum, and now if we're able to get a successful conviction, if you are trafficking a minor, you're looking at 50 years in prison. And so we've gone from an F to an A in the national ratings based upon the strength, and I appreciate the legislature doing what they did to pass the laws, and law enforcement. Law enforcement has done a great job of embracing this and working with us on it. So other than that, one of the things, and I don't know, I could consume your afternoon on some of these topics. Well, one of the topics I want to talk about is, I should mention, I can't forget we have Ag and Natural Resource Bureau, which does some really important work on water rights, the lawsuit with Kansas. We're always having to deal with our western states to make sure that we're getting the appropriate flows from the Platte, but Kansas is always going to make sure they're getting appropriate flows from the Republican River. And the fact of the matter is, those cases, there's a ton of money involved in complying with those compacts. You might be aware we had that dispute with Kansas. They were demanding $88 million, saying that we misappropriate water out of the Republican. We said we think we owe you about we owe you about 5. It goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said 5.5, so we considered that a win. But those cases, it's kind of interesting. You have these ag and natural resource lawyers, which are highly specialized. There's about 5 of them. Their office is right next to mine in downtown Lincoln there, and they are highly specialized. No one talks to them because they're so but they're a good bunch, and they save us money. One area that we have the Consumer Protection Division, and the Consumer Protection Division has really broad responsibilities. We can deal with complaints where consumers might have been deceived by a phone scam. What's so challenging there is we can rarely get the money back. So what we try to do is educational programs. Our person, Ryan Sothan, has traveled. I'm sure he's been down in Gates County several times, but travels around the state trying to educate, particularly at senior centers, how to avoid scams. So it's an important kind of a preventative medicine effort because if a person gets scammed, it is the way they set the structure up, for us to run the money down is virtually impossible. I remember a case when I first got into office, and I came walking into the office and I looked into our kind of library conference room, and there was a couple in there that I recognized from central Nebraska. And I went in and sat down and talked to them. I didn't know their names, but I just remembered them from the campaign. And what had happened was the husband had retired the year before, had stayed home. She was continuing to work. He started reading a magazine or magazines, and he sent in what he thought was a lottery application. And lo and behold, he calls his wife and says, "We've won $5 million." And they're all excited. But long story short, what they did is the scammer said, before we can send you the check or bring the check to your state, you need to say there's a franchise fee tax for the state of Illinois that will take $5,000. Then they said, oh, no problem. $5,000 for $5 million, to write out the check, send it out of her retirement. This went on over a year and a half. Now, one of the things not a year and a half of a year, 6 months. But at the very outset of the meeting, one of the things that she said to me is, hey, they're going to be coming to Omaha Thursday. Would you be willing to come with us to meet? Because we don't trust these people. Okay, that's at the outset of the meeting. After I bring over the consumer protection chief, and after over an hour of meeting and explaining and getting all the details, we found out that this couple had written over 23 checks for $260,000. 23 different methods that they used to say, 3 times when they said that they were going to be there in person to deliver, and came up. Now, I think to a certain extent you go, how in the world did you ever get past 2, checks and not start asking questions? The saddest part, and this shows you how some people can get confused and how scammers are pretty good, is we spent over an hour explaining the fact you've been scammed. And then at the end, she looks up at me and she says, will you be able to come to that meeting Thursday? And what do you do? Now, we do have the ability to lock down their bank accounts, the victims' accounts, to make sure. We don't utilize it very often, and we work closely with banks to learn of this information. Banks are kind of our eyes and ears sometimes of adults who are being scammed. But consumer protection does some really important stuff day to day in helping people. But on the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that I've become very involved in the last 4 years is dealing with Google and big tech. And the reason I've engaged so much of my time is because as you look at the extent of the problem, it affects all of us. 2 areas that I think call out for the most involvement by state AGs in consumer protection is with big tech and with the medical industry. Now, to any of you in the medical industry, don't worry, you're not currently under investigation. But the types of consumer concerns are fairly significant in both those areas. But let me tell you a little bit about big tech, and then I'll try to save a few minutes for question and answer. Back in 2018, we were at our national summer meeting, and we were in a closed session of AGs, and we had 3 panel members from the tech industry explain what the Googles, what the Facebook, the Amazons, what they are doing as far as gathering information. And they're gathering so much data. And the question is, well, what's so? My data is going to be pretty boring for the most part. Why are they gathering so much data? And the reason is that the technology is being developed that if they can gain so much data, basically they have the data is put into what's referred to as machine learning, and they can program those machines to basically have so much information that they can predict and almost make decisions, if you allow them to, on your behalf. Now you say, well, what are you talking about? Well, artificial intelligence is based upon how much data you can feed into that. And it has some great benefits. For example, breast cancer. You could put in 10,000 scans at various levels of a breast cancer condition. And the artificial intelligence programming, the analogs, have the capacity then to give the medical field so much information as to, okay, we see these patterns or traces in the scans, and would understand that historically what's happened with this pattern is that it has become serious, requiring surgery and removal. This pattern typically does not. I mean, there's tremendous medical benefits, because what it does is it amplifies 1,000-fold the degree of information that decisions can be made on, as opposed to one radiologist in Beatrice who has 10 years of history of looking at these versus all that data. So don't get me wrong, artificial intelligence in and of itself is not the scary term. What is concerning is the amount of information that they're taking and storing to develop your own personal profile. How many of you have a Samsung phone? Okay, in that Samsung phone, it has both a tracking locator, but not only that, it has a barometric pressure device. So it knows if you go to Lincoln and you go to the 10th floor of the U.S. Bank building, it knows you're at 13th and N or M, and you're on the 10th floor, and it's running that data every 6 seconds. If you have some of these sound devices in your home, it's recording information. The creepiest thing I ever saw is the FTC was concerned about this, and they were touring around the country, and they came to Omaha at Creighton University. And I was gonna, when the FTC comes in for hearings, people will come and testify as to their concerns on the issue. So I was asked to come and testify to the FTC there. What I had done is I found a doll, blonde-haired doll about this tall, and inside the doll is a listening device. And you can talk to the doll, but that doll is storing data and providing data. It's called the Internet of Things. And what's happening is, because recording data is important, they're putting it in devices you never would have expected. Refrigerators, how often the door is open, just constant data. And you're going, and in a lot of ways you go, who cares? And you will sign releases not knowing it, that you're willingly giving that data. Because, good example, there was some sporting event quite a while ago, and I think it was the University of Wyoming, and my buddy coaches there, and I wanted to figure out what the scores were. And I said, well, I'm going to want to follow them anyway. So I pull up the ESPN app. They had this long worded thing called a contract or an agreement. Well, I'm a lawyer. I know you don't need that. Boom. I accept. Now, I have no idea what I just gave those guys. Should have gone back and looked, but my life has been good. Because frankly, I'm not on social media. I don't have, the office does, but if you've seen a comment on Facebook, that's not me. That's Suzanne. Who sounds like me. No, but I don't have, personally, I don't have, I do text and emails. So I don't develop a really good track record. I don't go on the sites. But they know exactly what people are reading. And here's the whole name of the business model. It's called the attention economy. And what they're doing is they want to keep you engaged. And really, I'm trying to talk to young people about this, but an old guy in a tie talking to young people, I'm going to have, I'm not relating, I see it in their faces. But the longer you're engaged in this, and the longer you're scrolling, they're pulling down data. They're pulling down data, they're pulling down data. If they see that I like reading a certain area of politics, they're pulling down data. They're developing my profile in such a micro way that it'll be very appealable to advertisers who want to reach me. So I was looking for a small pontoon boat for fishing. Uh-oh, there's a guy looking for a small pontoon. So I mean, they're pulling that down and gathering all that information. Now, they do it because they can sell it, but the other thing is it's tremendously powerful to have that type of personal data. Why is it that Google is trying to gather medical records? Why is it that Facebook and Instagram is now offering this service to children? They came out with their announcement that Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, is going to create, right now we have a federal law that basically prohibits kids on the internet under the age of 13. Well, the standards for enforcing that are virtually zilch. So kids of all ages are on the internet. So Instagram said that they were going to come forward with a program designed for children. And they always market this as we're being responsible and trying to help. The fact of the matter is they're gathering data, and so their extent of profile on each one of us individually becomes not only something that they can market, but also something that they can control. And that's the big worry. There's been some studies done, one by a guy named Dr. Robert Epstein, who was the one who talked to us actually back in Portland in 2018. And what he was finding is that Facebook and Google both had made attempts to influence not only international political campaigns, but to influence our campaigns. And that they knew through their techniques that they could manipulate the number of people who turn out for elections. And they were so disturbed because Google had an intentional design to bring out the Latino vote in the 2016 election. It didn't work. The prompters that they tried to use did not work. But it's becoming more and more established that they can tweak the movements of people's choices, and including their positions on political issues. For example, if you go, I tested this one out back during the 2016. If you go back and put in HI, all of a sudden Google's going to hit Hillary. You go in and put DONALD, all right, I'm sure the next one. TR. I mean, it was that bad. And that they also can rank and kick out the articles. Now, Republican or Democrat, the fact of the matter is they are becoming one of the biggest information sources. And when they start influencing how they filter out information, it's a significant problem. But one other thing that I think is most concerning, and frankly we're looking into this, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting what we've already found. Have any of you watched the movie documentary Social Dilemma? Okay. Social Dilemma. There's another one that I really encourage you, if you have children or grandchildren, watch. Go on. I'd say go to Google. I don't go to Google. Go to DuckDuckGo, because they won't track you. Go to DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine, and type in Childhood 2.0. And it's a fascinating hour-and-a-half documentary on the influence of the internet, social media platforms on young people. And as a grandparent, I had my kids watching. My daughter said, "Dad, I cried after I watched that," because I was concerned about what the future held for my children if I didn't want them to be a part of that. And here's the big concern that comes with adolescence. To a certain extent, from my perspective, adults are responsible for their own choices. If they choose to put an Alexa in their house, they choose to give all the personal information they want for purposes of convenience, that's your call. But the group that I'm most concerned about and this is kind of across the board in the work we do, is our young people. Whether what's taking place is, I may be getting too much into the weeds because it interests me so much, but there is at Stanford University, there's a place called the Persuasion Lab, and it's a portion of Stanford University's computer department, and it's led by a psychologist named Dr. B.J. Fogg. And what the Persuasion Lab recognized is that you can develop certain strategies through psychological training that your user on a computer will not understand or appreciate. But what it does is it develops habits and behaviors. And so some of it's kind of simple. Putting the likes. Well, you know, how many followers or how many likes? And I use that to measure my popularity. For example, in Childhood 2.0, one of these young ladies, they had 6 high school girls and 6 high school boys talking about the impact of social media that it had on them. And she said, I can go out with my friends, go to a fun place, and I might take a picture of where we're eating or one of the plates and put it on my Instagram account. I'll get 5 likes. Another girl in my class will be wearing a certain swimsuit or something very revealing. She may take a picture. She may use some of the editing services on that to enhance the picture. She'll get 500 likes. Now you tell me who the loser is. It sends a message to the girl who chose not to take a picture of herself, to objectify herself, but rather just having fun with friends. She's the loser, the one who gets 500 likes. These subtle things are very well known to the industry. They know the different things adolescents who are most prone to it, but also adults fall right into that. The other thing that they do that is really something I think all of us have to be aware of is, particularly coming through this presidential election, what sells and drives engagement is controversy. And so what they do is they feed and feed and feed controversy. And they run you down a hole, and that's one of the things you saw in Social Dilemma. Tristan Harris, who's a former Google exec, who's now has his own organization, who in fact we're consulting with to learn more. But what he talks about is running down the brainstem and of this type of information. So I have a sister-in-law who says to me a week ago, Doug, I got to ask you a question. There's something going on in Arizona where Trump thinks that maybe he can get back. And I go, Linda, where did you get the information? Well, it was on the internet. Okay. Who sent it to you? And she's identified that she's strongly in this camp over here, and she's getting fed all the information that will feed into her Trump strong bias. And they know that. And so they will build upon that. And the thing that I find most troubling is there was a really good investigative report that was done about 6 months ago by MIT. And in the MIT report, they had spoken with some Facebook programmers. And as more data is gathered, the machine learning sophistication and capabilities are becoming greater and greater. And what was happening is there was some among the engineers at Facebook who were saying, hey, we're concerned a little bit, we've got some ethical concerns where this is going. And they said, for example, we can identify here a 15-year-old girl on the internet who seems to be melancholy, drifting towards depression. Issues about cutting, anorexia, some other things. We can identify through the analog where this is starting to pick up some momentum, and we can redirect. But what redirect does is basically shuts them off. I mean, it cuts down engagement. It's basically trying to rescue, if you will. The engineers brought this concern up, and basically the leadership in Facebook said, yes, fine, but let's move on. did nothing to address the concern. In fact, according to this article in the MIT, this MIT magazine, I think is a pretty credible source. According to this article, what Facebook does is they grant financial incentives to those engineers who can develop more engagement. So if you're one who comes in and tries to raise an ethical question about where we go with a young 15-year-old who is showing some signs of depression or mental health concerns, and you amplify that decline as opposed to try to steer out, that shows you how really diabolical this business model is on engagement. And it's one that I think is accelerating very fast. I'll just wrap up here real quick. Back in 2016, it took place in Seoul, Korea, but there's a game called Go. I never heard of it before. It was created BC back in China by a Chinese emperor to develop concentration and intelligence of the Chinese emperor's son. Have any of you seen the Go game before? Okay. Stop me if I go too far. But you look at, Roger, you got a bunch of Go players, that's pretty impressive. You're in the state. But you look at it, it's just a board with lines. And I don't know how to play the game. But what happened is in 2016, Google created a team called AlphaGo. And what they said is, we're going to, and this is it's the pride of China, this game in South Korea and in Southeast Asia. So everyone, to me, it looks like it's checkers on, or chess on steroids. It looks like it's pretty complicated. So what they did is, Google fed in the AlphaGo team, called DeepMind. They fed in all the data of prior games, and they have a world championship. And they brought in the world champion from South Korea at this big event, and they had 5 games that they played. And the artificial intelligence Google AlphaGo team won 4 of the 5. And it just rocked the world of particularly China. So Chairman Ping comes out and a year later, in 2017, recognizing the power of artificial intelligence. And he says China will, by 2025, will match the expertise or advancement of artificial intelligence, digital economy, micro production like chips, quantum computing, and I can't remember the 5th one. Well, we're now in a technology arms race. The problem is China uses it ultimately for the benefit of the Chinese Communist Party. We're more of a private sector battle going on. So you're talking about automated cars, you're talking about facial identification for commercial transactions and things like that. But all of this is moving so fast, and it's consuming so much data on individuals that I think it's a very significant concern as to what it does to our liberties and freedom when very few know so much. They know more about us than we know about ourselves. And that gets a little concerning because with that comes power. And I'll just conclude, when I first heard this presentation in Portland, I was sitting next to the AG from Illinois, and her name was Lisa Madigan. And Lisa has been the Democrat AG of Illinois. The Madigan family is a strong Democrat powerhouse in Illinois. And Lisa and I probably see the world completely different on just about every issue. But we get along. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and I don't think of myself as the world's or the sky's falling type person, but I'm hearing this and I'm going, this is a tremendous amount of power of going into companies who I believe see the world completely, Bezos sees the world completely different than I do, the head of Amazon, or Zuckerberg. And so I'm just thinking kind of to myself, I think we're in a world of hurt here where this is going and the amount of power. And Lisa leans over to me and she says, Doug, I think this is one of the greatest threats to our democracy. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, okay, Doug, you're getting too carried away, you're overreading this, the world's not going to end tomorrow. And then she leans over and I go, well, guess the world is going to end. But it really surprised me that she said that, because I'm thinking to a certain extent politically how they could influence our elections. And here she is. Those guys who run those businesses see the world much similar to her than I do. And she's worried about the impact on our democracy. I share that story just so at the end you guys don't think I'm crazy, because a Democrat in Illinois said the same thing. All right, I've taken a lot of your time. Thanks for being good listeners. I'd be glad to take questions. I filibustered, didn't I? I left a minute. Yeah, Rich.
With everything you talked about, what's going to be the answer? Is it going to be federal legislation, federal oversight?
It's a good question.
Litigation, civil litigation against these companies?
That's the big topic, both in DC, the Senate, the House, and 49 attorneys general have been engaged in 2 different antitrust lawsuits. Nebraska and Colorado are leading one out. Texas is leading another one out. But antitrust can only do so much. It's very wonky type stuff. One of the areas we also are considering is in the area of consumer protection, deceptive trades practices, because if you look at the techniques that came out of the persuasion lab in Stanford, almost all of your programmers either went to Stanford and are part of that class or know what it's M times A times T equals B. That's kind of behavior design in a short equation. And so they're all implementing, whether it's TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, all of them are using these techniques that we think are deceptive trade practices, particularly with adolescents. As Tristan Harris put it, you have on one side of the screen a 15-year-old boy. On the other side of the screen, you have a company that's built up an extraordinary amount of data on that person and an advertising interest, both standing to profit. They say it's not a fair match. And so that's one where consumer protection may come in and pursue something there. But that would have to be done state by state, whereas the antitrust lawsuit, we've joined with the Department of Justice, and we filed that one lawsuit in federal court in DC. Now those are the litigation avenues, and the big question there, Rich, that's so hard to figure out is what's the remedy? Can you break Google up? Can you stop making, actually in the sharing of data, a proactive consumer choice as opposed to a subconscious consumer surrender? Different things that might be done there. And then there's both the Senate and the House have proposed bills. One of the things, from a multi-state standpoint, that we have to stay away from, we're focusing our multi-state efforts on children and deception. If you start getting into political speech and things like that, you can't keep together multi-state unity, because Republicans will go this way, the Dems will go that way, and it just doesn't work. But that's also a concern. Yeah.
You know, the Senate passed a bill yesterday dealing with a lot of these things you're talking about, the microchip, et cetera, et cetera. So, Republican and Democrat passed it.
I have to look at that.
Yes.
That wasn't it wasn't, well, I'll look at it.
There were about 4 items that I remember the microchip. I mean, we're going to do it here. We're going to make it happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry that my phone went off, but
Me too.
with Aubrey Trail being number 12 on death row now,
Yes.
what's the Attorney General's office playbook in dealing with the other 11? Where are we at?
Yeah, elaborate on that. Leslie Trail got sentenced to the death penalty about 2 hours ago. And the challenge is there's been a protocol developed at gathering the drugs on death row. Now, some of the defendants frankly, the first one that was, when Nebraska voters came back and reinstated the death penalty. The first person that was chosen for the death penalty was the bank robber from Norfolk. I think there were 5 deaths associated with that. He pursued several appeals, which delayed time. Next one was Roger D. Moore, and Moore did not choose to use any of the legal procedures. So all the other people on death row, I can't say all of them, but either they're in the appeal process, post-conviction appeals, or if noticed up, it's anticipated that they would immediately seek appeals. So you have 2 timing challenges. One is the death row inmates choosing to seek a post-conviction appeal through the federal and state courts. And then the other challenge is the drugs. There was a private person who came forward on the drugs that were difficult to obtain. And so that actually is in the hands of the Department of Correction. The AG's office does not participate in that. Okay, so good question.
Cyber currency, what is that looking like for the future, different implications?
The implications are pretty big. I don't know enough to say what it looks like. You know, I think it got real hot with some momentum, and everyone was saying, boy, I wish I had Bitcoin. And then cooled down. You know, smart people, Buffett, I don't think is real enthusiastic about. So I don't know what its future is, but I gotta imagine it's not going away. And the problem, as you know, in the law enforcement world is it's used as the currency for a lot of illegal activity, particularly on the dark web. If there's a really significant drug dark web. You guys know the dark web? It's
A question, would you explain what that
yeah.
looks like, I guess?
Yeah. So here's what happens. The federal government created a system where they could run communications to multiple servers. And why they did that was they had confidential informants out in the field. And they didn't want to give those informants some degree of confidence that their communications would not be traced. They created this thing called the dark web, the Tor network. And so what happened is, and I don't know why, I've never heard the explanation why they did it, but it was created by the federal government, used for important informants. What they ended up doing is putting the technology out there in the market. And who ran with it? Drug dealers and child porn folks. So the drug one on the dark web, what makes it so difficult is it's not impossible, but it is extremely hard. If I order, a kilo of cocaine through the dark web, and they ever tap into the supplier system, they're going to have a really, really hard time finding me and getting back to me. They're going to have a really hard time finding who the supplier is, because it's just a very difficult process. There was a really large drug ring that was run out of Seattle, Washington, and the operation by law enforcement is called Operation Silk Road. And they were finally able to locate who was supplying all these drugs. But Bitcoin, or cryptocurrency, was the method of maintaining, if you were a buyer, some confidence that they wouldn't trace it back to you. So you combine the dark web, where you can make the communication, create the solicitation, and add cryptocurrency to that, you're going to find a lot of people that are going to say, well, I'll be very engaged in that type of market. Just a little interesting history, and this was going on when I came into office. It's now been convictions, and people are serving time. But there was a case. There was a no surprise. There was a dark web pedophile location, and it was worldwide, it was big volume, and it was as dark as it gets. You could have someone, and I won't go into details, but you could have someone from Paris want to see something happen, and someone from Ecuador for $20,000 would depict it and make it happen, and often involving children. And that would be all run through this dark web with one controller, dealer basically. Seattle was where the drug dealer was. And they knew this was going on, they knew it was getting a lot of volume, but they couldn't figure out the source. And then, this would be about 6 years ago, the U.S. Department of Justice got a call from law enforcement in the Netherlands. And they said, we think we've tapped pedophiles. We think we know where the source is. And Department of Justice, which oversees the FBI, took the information. It was being operated out of Bellevue, Nebraska. And the guy who was operating it was about 24 years old. And whenever they do basically a bust on something like that, it's best to catch the person on the system. And they could tell that he was on the system typically from like 7 till midnight. Residential area in Bellevue. He always parked in front of the house. And they felt that he was in this one room when he was on, from what they could tell from surveillance. So their theory was, we will pull up a tow truck. And when the tow truck goes into reverse and does the beep sound, he'll look out the window, see that his car is being towed, he'll run out, we'll run in, grab the laptop, and we've got it. What happened was the rental tow truck, when they went to put it in reverse, didn't have the beep feature. You can plan and plan and plan. So, being smart special agents, the FBI guys sounded the horn in a rhythm. And that was good enough, it got him out. Arrested him. I think he's 24 years old. He got convicted, I think he got 25 years. But they had to keep the thing operating for a period of time to get the heavy users. And I always found this interesting. Just one of the heavy users that they convicted, got 25 years, was the head of IT for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So this is an IT guy in D.C. doing IT for one of the largest federal agencies. And not that it matters, but it was interesting. His password was F Jesus. I thought, it's interesting. But this guy was deeply into child, and it's not just pictures. They could request things. So it's pretty amazing what can happen. I know your question was, what do I think about cryptocurrency? I think it's a big problem. I think the dark web's going to be a big problem, and I think more and more of these types of crimes are always going to be difficult, whether it's sex trafficking or drug trafficking or pedophilia. So, is anyone here from the Optimist Club? Can you get me out of this hole? All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. Everybody go back to the office and check their Facebook page and see what I introduced public figures early. Forgot our amazing mayor back here, Stan Worth. Don't want to do that. Stan does a great job for the city. So, any week's speaker is Myron Dorn. So Myron will be here and share what happened in legislative session, maybe or maybe not. So the sign-up sheet, did that make it around? Okay.